888-4444.
We are back with more hot topics on Winnipeg Direct, a show dedicated to giving you the real story on the big issues. I'm your host, John Youngberg, and joining me on our panel today is City Councillor Grant Nordman, Sharon Blady from the NDP party, and also the MLA for Kirkfield Park, as well as the Assistant to the Minister of Family Services and Consumer Affairs, and lastly, Mr. Brian Kelsey from the State of the City Research. The provincial budget is out. Now it's time for us to take a closer look at what the NDP's numbers mean for Winnipeg and Manitoba. The provinces have jurisdiction to collect sales tax to increase their revenues. Municipalities, such as the City of Winnipeg, generally collect their revenues through property taxes and other means such as parking and speeding tickets under the Highway Traffic Act. Currently, the provincial sales tax rate is 7% of most purchases. Since 2008, Winnipeg, Brandon, and the Association of Manitoba Municipalities have asked the province to increase the PST an additional point. Recently, the Business Council of Manitoba has been lobbying Finance Minister Roseanne Wowchuk to increase the sales tax to 8%. The province so far has denied their request, but it is now carefully reconsidering the issue. Sharon, I'm going to throw the first question at you. As a member of the NDP party, where do you think the 2011 provincial budget falls short?
Well, I think the only way you could say it falls short is just the fact that in coming out of the economic downturn, we had to watch things. We had to make sure that, places that we would have liked to increase things in, we couldn't have. But what was really nice to see was the fact that we didn't cut back on investments in essential services. We weren't firing nurses to balance the budget as others have done before. So I think you always want to be able to do more, and you can talk to Minister Wowchuk. She would always want to do more and find another bit of money somewhere, but at the same time not to do it on the backs of the citizens. And that's part of the reason why we rejected the HST, because the HST would have, in harmonizing the tax, put taxes on things that currently don't have provincial sales tax, and that would have hit some of our lowest income earners. It would have hit regular people in a way that we didn't find to be acceptable.
Okay, all right. Well, Councillor Nordman, in your opinion, is it fair that Manitobans subsidize the municipalities when most don't even reside in that municipality, covering the brunt of such things as infrastructure maintenance?
Well, let's face it, the City of Winnipeg's the big dog, and I have lots of country cousins that live outside the perimeter highway, but if it doesn't happen in Winnipeg, it doesn't happen. And at this point in time, we have a provincial government and a succession of provincial governments who have made it their business to look after, in one particular area, highways and roads that pass through cities like Port St. Perry, Brandon, Steinbach. They pay for those roads. There's not a dime comes to Portage Avenue or Main Street in the City of Winnipeg that's dedicated because it's a provincial highway. The reality is we've asked, along with the Association of Manitoba Municipalities, AMM, that the provincial government would consider giving us 1% of the provincial sales tax dedicated specifically to infrastructure, bridge renewal, and fixing our roads and streets, and not just in Winnipeg, but right across the province to all the RMs. And at this point in time, they've chosen to sort of do a shell game with, yes, they've dedicated certain amounts of money to us, but our ask is for 1% over and above what they're already giving us, and that's not happening.
No, and when you say a shell game, what are we talking about here?
Well, that's what the original ask was for the 1%, and they looked to see what, in fact was already dedicated to the City of Winnipeg or to other RMs, and they chose to say, yes, we're giving you 1%, but it's based on what they've already given us or dedicated to us. We're looking for a 1% in excess of the existing projects and programs that are already being funded.
All right. Now, Brian, as you know, the city's requested that 1 point of the 7 in sales tax. What are your thoughts on this one?
Well, there's actually a lot wrong for both sides on this debate, and let me just try and pick on two right now and maybe squeeze in one more.
Sure.
And that is, first, I think the city should know better in the sense that the province right now is in a deficit position. It's been in a deficit position for a couple of years. Whatever the cause, that's something where if the province was taking 1% out of existing funds, as the AMM has asked, then you're going to have to cut something that isn't going towards reducing that deficit to be spending more on the City Hall and city priorities, which is just not going to happen. The alternative is you increase that tax by 1%. That's going to trigger a referendum under the balanced budget legislation. I don't see a lot of municipal politicians standing up saying they're going to be knocking on doors on that referendum. So on the one hand, the city's ask of the province I don't think it's been very clearly made. There's no clarity from the city, for instance, to say this new infrastructure money, if it was to magically appear, is going to be incremental. It's going to be over and above what the city's already spending on infrastructure, so that those dollars don't go to, say, reduce the business tax or something like that. So the city's not asking very well. But on the other hand, the province could easily be stepping in and saying, well, not today, but let's start negotiating a long-term agreement, because almost everybody, in the legislature and outside understands that there's an infrastructure problem that's got to be dealt with in the long term in Winnipeg, and start a long-term conversation about, well, if the budget's balanced in a couple of years, maybe we can start guaranteeing debt in the short term and then flowing PSD revenue in the long term to solve this problem. But because the city's putting a gun to the province's head to say we want something now, because the province has already got its own gun to its head in the form of the deficit, that conversation is not happening.
Now, Sharon, I see you nodding and agreeing, I assume.
Well, he definitely had some points there, but it's in many respects a timing issue. And that, as you mentioned, we have to return to balance, and we have a 5-year plan to do that. And when we're in a point of returning to balance, and I think that's the other thing too that's interesting, is that we spent the past decade building up a fiscal stability account, that rainy day fund, and that's what's helped us get through this in a way that we can be back in balance within the 5 years as planned, and we're in some respects been ahead of schedule in some areas. So I think that that's been part of it, is that it is the getting back to that point where we can do those kinds of things and start those longer term conversations, because this is not really the time and place. And it's, and I've met with the folks from the AMM, had dinner with them just a few weeks back. They always do a lobby day with us, and had dinner, and we talked about these kinds of issues. And really there is a positive relationship there, and it is about things going on in the long term and working with all municipalities throughout the province.
And just so we don't agree too much, that I'll cut in and say that there is, I mean, on the other side, that the city's criticism of the province in this budget, I think, shell game may be strong language, in part because what the province has just done is pretty consistent with what the mayor was lobbying for up until 2008, when he started lobbying for more, that he was a fan of PST conversion, which is what this is now. In the past, and it's only been in the last couple of years that the additional point has come onto the agenda. That being said, that the reason why this debate has been going on for 10, 15, 20 years is because provincial transfers are too tight, by which I mean not that they're too cheap. Provincial transfers have been going up faster than inflation over the last few years to the city of Winnipeg, but that there's not a lot of discretion in how you use that money. So if priorities change from one year to the next, if libraries need the more money more one year, or policing needs the money more the next, you end up in a long series of negotiations just to move that money around within the same portfolio. Something the province could have done this year that probably would have made the city happier is loosen up the money with that PSD conversion. Make it possible for the city to sit down and say, well, we're going to take that 1 point of PSD and move 20% over in this direction as opposed to that direction, because it's a higher priority. That would have been a simple step that could have taken place that hasn't, and I think that's partly where some of the municipalities' backs are up.
Grant, where do you think it should go?
Well,
if it comes to fruition, where do you think it should go?
If it comes to fruition, I heard it as recently as 6 months ago when we had the civic election, and I knocked on 9,000 doors, that people want their roads fixed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Crime is a problem. But particularly in the area that Sharon and I mutually represent, she's Kirkville Park, I'm St. Charles, it's basically the same area. They want the roads fixed, and at the point we stand today, their property taxes do not come anywhere close to fixing the roads, and even if we added at the city 1 or 2% of property to the property tax, it would generate $10 million. Well, $10 million doesn't go very far when it's talking about bricks and mortar and concrete. So I would dedicate it absolutely to infrastructure renewal.
All right, Sharon, we were just talking on the prior panel about child poverty and hunger here in Manitoba. Do you think some of that money could be spent to eradicating that situation?
Well, I think that's the other thing too, is that infrastructure is one thing, and it's definitely a foundation of sorts.
Absolutely.
But we do need to be investing in people, because when we invest in people, when we provide them with frontline services so that they are healthy, happy, and educated, then they are better able to have full social inclusion, and with full social inclusion comes socioeconomic participation, which again, if you're looking at it in a strictly monetary sense, does put things back into the coffers. The more folks that there are working, educated, participating, taking their kids out, you know, for this treat, that treat, going out to a movie, the better off people are socioeconomically.
But that doesn't fix the roads.
Well, it will from a tax-based perspective eventually. But the point is, we need to look at systemic things, and also too. I mean, it is you mentioned shell game. I have 2 words for that: frontage levy. In terms of
frontage
shell
levy,
game,
absolutely.
as opposed to not being property tax. Again,
absolutely.
Many consider that a shell game as well. So I think what it comes down to is no municipality, no province is ever going to really feel 100% comfortable with everything. There's always going to be something more that you wish you could do. And we're always going to be negotiating about how we go about working between municipalities and provinces and federal governments. And again, it's about trying to build positive relationships, because the more we can negotiate about these things in a positive upfront way, the more will get done for everybody.
Well, I think the province is certainly aware of the Mayor Cates's initiative with Mr. Dombrowski, the chairman of AMM, and they did a joint announcement 10 days ago to say this is, you know, the direction that we'd like to see it go, and the facts that were presented to us prior to the budget were not the things that were read in the budget on the day that it was presented in the legislature. So,
right.
Well,
Yeah, I mean, first, this is part of the problem, is that I think there's to steal a Paul Newman line, I think what we have here is a failure to communicate. And part of the problem that I certainly saw at City Hall is that there's an endemic problem with city councillors sometimes and public officials there, understanding that the province often has a legitimate position that may not be the same as the city's legitimate position. Yes. I think there are some things the city can be doing to deal with infrastructure by focusing more of its own resources. Quite a bit of the capital money that the city is spending on infrastructure is not going to core priority areas right now. The city is borrowing for other projects like the new police HQ, but it could be borrowing at incredibly cheap rates for roads and infrastructure. And I've explained to the city how they could do that risk-free and triple the road construction budget in the next few years if they wanted to by redirecting money that's already in their budget. But that sort of thing doesn't happen. And vice versa, that on the provincial side, I think the province sometimes encourages the city to be exploring other priorities by matching dollars on mega projects that maybe aren't the road priority that citizens are expressing to councillors and so forth. If infrastructure and policing and reducing crime really are the top 2 priorities in the city of Winnipeg, let's sit down and look at the math and see how many dollars are going from the city's construction budget to those priorities and how many are going towards other things. And I think you'd find some room to maneuver there.
Grant, you mentioned that $10 million doesn't go that far. Of course it doesn't. Do you think the taxes in this province are too low?
No, I don't think on a personal level they're too low. Property taxes, we've been very generous in the city of Winnipeg, managed to hold the line for 13 years. What it'll be in 2012, I'm not sure. The reality is we have a provincial election in 5 months, and I would say that this budget was sort of a pre-election budget, a sprinkling of funds here, there, and everywhere to sort of keep a few folks at bay. But at the end of the day, wasn't enough dedicated funding. So at this point in time, I just think Mr. Selinger should realize that he's the Premier of Winnipeg. 700,000 people almost live in this province. 2/3 of the population are right here inside the Perimeter Highway, with 31 MLAs that should be more responsive to the citizens of Winnipeg.
I think we're very responsive. I mean, I think that's why we're investing in things like healthcare. I mean, the transformations that are occurring right in our own neighborhood. I mean, remember the time when the Grace was only open 14 hours a day? Under a previous government. Now it's open 24/7. The ER is going to be expanding with the $20 million expansion and an access center.
In 2008, we were closing the ER. We were having a battle saving our Grace.
But no, that was your son starting a petition to help Murdered Regers campaign. Well, the reality was it never was going to close, and that was some fear mongering that we.
Now we're getting to family.
And exactly. But the point is that we are investing in those things, and we are looking after the whole province. province, because while there might be a solid concentration of a population here, the point is we govern for all Manitobans in all jurisdictions.
All right, wait.
And let me look in the camera and ask this closing question. If you're a Winnipegger, which level of government's taxes are too high right now, the provinces or the cities? I suspect most people would say the provinces first before they come to the cities.
Right.
And yet the city's ask is for the province to spend more of its money on the city.
We duke this out when we go away, but I'd like to thank our guests for joining us on the Provincial Budget Breakdown right here on Winnipeg Direct. I'm your host, John Youngberg, and I'd love to hear some of your ideas you might have for an upcoming show. Check us out on Facebook and Twitter, and just look for Winnipeg Direct. You'll find us right there. Thanks again. We'll see you next Sunday right here.